All right, cool. So, welcome. I'm Tenji. I am the UX developer here at Must Win. I'm one of two, I'll say. And today I'm going to give a talk about design. The goal here is to kind of like give a talk about design for non-designers, what designers kind of think about when they're thinking about different aspects of UI and UX and then all those kind of things. So there's a really cool site that I kind of like abridged my whole talk from, and it's called HackDesign, and I'll go into a little bit about that after the talk. But today what I want to focus on is typography. So let's do this whole desktop. I don't know if that worked. Let's do this. All right, cool. So typography. So a few things that I want to talk about is that what actually is typography and what kind of things should you think about as a developer or as a designer when you're choosing a font for your site. There's actually a lot of like intuitive little things that kind of people don't think of when you're just picking a font. But first, let's start with a simple exercise. So here we have a bunch of websites. We have Craigslist, we have like Signals, and you can see when you look on the left side, on the right side, there's a clear difference. On the left side, it's just like the site just as itself. But on the right side, what I've done, what's been done is that we've removed all of the text. And then we have two more examples. Here is like Twitter back in the day with its text and without of it, and then Gmail with its text and without of it. And to be honest, like you're thinking, like why does this matter? And the reason is that design basically is all about words. When you think about all the content that goes onto your website, it's literally just words, just text. That's what dominates the site. That's what people do when they come to your site. They come to read. They come to view text. So literally 95% of all your web content is based on words. So it's really important to think about what kind of words you want to, how you want to structure those words, what those words should look like, how should they be scaled out, how should they, like when the user comes to see your site, you should really think about how you want to structure all that text that comes onto there. So let's move on. So there's a quote from a guy who is really, really big into typography. He was like one of the top guys who kind of like studied font. His name is Emil Reuter. And he says it is a typographer's task to divide and organize and interpret the mass amount of printed matter in such a way that a reader will be able to have a good chance of finding what is interest to them. And he basically breaks this down to saying that when you think about text, you want to be able to take all these massive amounts of information and you want to put them in a presentable and readable way that the user can pick up either your newspaper or your site and immediately able to find what is of interest to them via headlines, titles, captions, all those kinds of elements that go into text on a website. And so there's two parts to think about in typography. There's macro typography and there's micro typography. Macro typography is basically the overall text structure of your website. What are headers? What are subheaders? What are captions? What's the body text? And then you also have micro typography, which is basically the details of the font that you pick. What is the font? How big should the body size font be in comparison to the header font? What kind of spacing should each of these elements of text have in comparison with each other? These are all really important things to think about because they help display information in a way that a reader can look at your website and tell what they want to know or what they want to see. And so in the end, you really want to treat text as a user interface. This quote was pulled from another website, and I forgot who said it. That's fine. That's in the end what you want to think about when you think about text on a larger scale. In the whole like broad scheme of building out your site, you want to treat text as like the core of your user interface because it's what people come to read, what people come to do when you go to your site. So let's break it down a bit. First thing about text and first thing about type is that it's got to be completely readable. There's no point in putting a specific font onto your website just because it looks cool if people can't read it, then you're not doing it right. So if you think about these two fonts, like the top font over here, the quick brown fonts jumped over the lazy dog. It's a calligraph tech. It's nice. It's pretty. It gives you like a certain tone, but the average reader will look at it and be like, "Why didn't you just use Helvetica Neue? Why didn't you just use something that that I can read?" And one of the reasons why people kind of like vie towards Helvetica Neue in the end is because it's a good text. It's readable. It's scalable. It is expandable. It is used in a multitude of different areas and different types of face, such as headers and subtitles and stuff like that. And it makes sense. It's a good font to use. So the next thing you want to think about is the actual typeface. And really the key point here is just don't overthink it. If you find a typeface that is, simple and readable and scales well, then that's pretty much it. You want to kind of opt for a typeface that's balanced and geometric and scalable as well. So if it's balanced, like there's a good balance between its bold style and its light style, whether it looks fine and balanced when it's thin, and then it looks fine and balanced when it has like a font weight of like 800. So there's no like huge disparity between the two. They don't look jarringly different. You want to keep things geometric. You want to you split a line between each of the letters. There's equidistance between each of that line. It's not weird to look at. There's no like awkwardness in between the split. It's a geometric thing, and it also fits well within a grid. It has to be scalable. When you're increasing or decreasing the font size, how does it look? Does it fit well within the page that you're trying to create? So next is pairing. When you're designing a website, very rarely can you get away with just one type of font face. Usually people pick two. It's good to pick two because it allows a distinction between content that is going to grab the user's attention and content that the user will actually read. So usually what people will do is they pick like a serif, sans serif kind of typeface to kind of dictate what the title is that's grabbing the attention of the user, and then how the body will be laid out. Like is like the actual body text readable? So here are just like two examples of just like a standard serif font, which is just like, it's kind of like a more older style, kind of Times New Romanesque. And then you have sans serif, which is more, Helvetica, more Avenir, more, that kind of thing. And people traditionally use the serif font style for titles and subtitles. Those are designed to be, they can be a little bit larger, and they're helping to grab the user's attention. And then sans serif is a more natural, readable, more geometric style that is used for readability. So like larger bodies of text tends to be more sans serif. Another thing to think about is size. So a safe rule that I've found when I was doing my research is that people tend to stick with around 12-point font for a body text because it's a nice readability. And titles are more of an odd spot, but they should only should be as big as they need to be. It is very, very important to experiment over and over and over again to determine how big a title should be in relevance to its text. You don't want to like make it over massive. You don't want to have it dominate the entire page that the user has to like scroll endlessly to figure out exactly what's going on. A title should serve to block off information and let the user know where they want to go to immediately and what kind of information they're looking for when they go to your website. So they should really only should be as big as they need to be. And it's really, like I said, more reliant on feel and experimentation. So this is one of the more iterative processes when you're picking size for a particular font. And you also want to establish a hierarchy. It's very, very important that you have a clear distinction between what a title is and what a body is. You can use that through font styles, using a serif style for a title and a sans serif style for sans serif for body. But you can also kind of like mess with it other ways. So there's font size as well. You can have the same typeface or the same style typeface to sans serif, and then have one larger than the other to indicate what the title is and what the body is. But you can also use color. So color is a great example of illustrating, the hierarchy of text. So over here, we have this example where posts is in white, but it's the same size and weight as all the other, readability, relative readability excuses, optimizer, all these other ones. But you can immediately tell intuitively what the main title is and what the subsections are, just by color and by contrast of color in between the two of them. So there's a few more small things. There's leading, which is basically line height, and it can change a poor font into an elegant one. And leading is really important when you want to kind of like increase readability and, like ease of like, naturalness and geometricness in your site. And it's just a matter of kind of like messing around with the line height. Smaller text, body text should really just have like a tighter spacing because you can squeeze more content into there. And usually this kind of property is pretty much default set to be fine. But kind of like the golden rule is that if you have a small text with a 1% or 1 pixel line height, then the body text should have like a 1.5 difference between the two. That's like the golden ratio. So here's some examples of like what line height can do. So in the first example over here, the top left, it's basically a 1.0 line height. And if you look at the bottom right, it's like a 2.0 line height. So there's ways that you can alter line height to kind of like increase readability or size of your page and stuff like that. Next is tracking. Tracking is basically the spacing of a letter. So most fonts kind of have good standard tracking initially, but there are ways to kind of increase tracking to kind of like make things more readable. A good example of using tracking is where you have small caps. So a lot of fonts do have small caps capabilities, but if you take a font size that is meant for lowercase, make it small caps, all of a sudden that makes it a little bit harder to read. So increasing the letter spacing in between the two, in between each of the small cap letters, increases readability and it makes it easier for the user to read what's going on. So that's an area where tracking is really a benefit. So as you can see here, it increases the readability. It separates out the letters more. People can understand immediately what the word is instead of it being scrunched up. So you're sacrificing, I guess, like space, but in terms of readability, your readers will kind of thank you more for it, and as well as your site visitors. And color is kind of like the easiest one and also kind of the hardest one. It's kind of more about contrast. So if you go back to my previous example where I talked about, how you can use a color to differentiate between what is a title and what is a subtitle. Sometimes it's all you need. You can get away with just using one typeface, using color as like your hierarchy visual to indicate what is the title and what is a subtitle. And what you're looking for is contrast in the end. The best kind of contrast is black text on a white background. It's used everywhere. If you look at Medium or Word document, word processors, or like, the default style for terminals and all that kind of things, that is the style that's been used for over and over because it's easy to read. It's like the most, there's studies on why this is the easiest to read, and I can post some later, but that's what you're looking for in the end is a contrast between colors. And that will help increase readability and make your font stand out from the rest. And then finally, you really want to think about the grid layout. And the grid is super, super essential because it also enforces how geometric your font is. When you're designing a web page, it's best to design in a grid formation, to think about how you want to lay things out in a grid. And that's why, you have classes. Yeah, that's why you have like libraries like Bootstraps or Skeleton or all these other things that kind of break it down into a grid for you, because it makes it easy as a web designer to lay out your text in a reasonable fashion. That's why you always have, like a title at the top, and then you can have like subsections of text and captions and stuff like that, because it helps breed geometricity. Makes things geometric, and it makes your font geometric, and it also, in the end, leads to a beautiful site. So here's an example of using the grid system. It's basically, each section is blocked off. You can immediately tell what the whole title is because it takes up larger parts of the grid, and you can easily find exactly what you're looking for by traversing the grid. And it makes it easier for your font to be aligned and your text to be aligned in your website. And it also makes it also more responsive in the end. So it all works out. So there's some extra things I guess you can also think about when you're choosing a font for your website. Uniqueness can sell everything. it can even define what your brand is. You can choose a font that is just out there, that just like screams, look at me. And that's perfectly fine. It sets you apart from the norm. It sets you apart from everybody that's just using the standard sans serif style type font. And it gives your site an image. It's perfectly fine to be unorthodox. People use Impact for a reason. Impact is a bold, in your face font. And it kind of sells the message that, look at me, this is what I am, this is what I do. And it's fine to break from the norm of, typical serif or sans serif styles, to look for fonts that sell your site well and give your site the message that it deserves. But it's really, really important to bring it back into the context of your design. You need to think about, how well does your font fit with the overall theme of your site? How well does your font complement the colors and the backgrounds and the spacing and the grid layout that you've designed for your font? Does it scale well? Is it, geometric? Does it kind of fit within? And most importantly, is it readable? So for example, I kind of went through like Andreessen Horowitz, like, top startup sites, and I found a couple examples of fonts that kind of like illustrate what the story is and like what the site is trying to be, and who they're trying to target as an audience. So for example, we'll look at 500 pixels. And the first thing I noticed is that it's using a sans serif type font. And sans serif is kind of really interesting for a number of reasons. It kind of gives the illusion of, a softness or a welcoming attitude. It kind of gives the illusion of inclusion as well. Notice that you have a difference between like the header and like the main text. They're just using a simple size. The contrast is pretty good. But the reason that I think they use this type of style font is because it's a readable font, it's scalable, it's a simple font, and it also gives the impression of the emotion that it gives is something that says, come here, we have this great service for you where you can store all of your photos and share it with everybody. And it invokes this sense of a great community that, if you're a photographer and you want to be a part of it, this is the place for you. And something as simple as a font can tell that. We have Actifico, which is more of a data center data virtualization thing. And immediately the first thing I noticed is that they use like a high caps bolder font compared to 500 pixels. And what this illustrates to me is that they're all about business. They're all about security. They're all about getting stuff done well, getting stuff done correctly. And the whole tone of the site means that the whole tone of the font kind of gives me as a customer the illusion that these guys kind of know what they're talking about. These guys, are serious about the way they put themselves forward. The font is bold, the text is like strong, and it's a pretty good contrast as well between the two. Questionable about the color, but in the end, that's what the idea is trying to illustrate. Same thing for Armino. Armino is also, data intelligence, stuff like that. And you notice they also use like bigger, bolder font. So it's really important to choose when you're trying to illustrate a site, what kind of message you're trying to send to your users. If you're like a more community, social oriented site, like, social media or stuff like that, a sans serif kind of, softer, lowercase-esque font might be better for you. It gives you the sense of this is an inviting place. If you're serious about, getting data integrity and security and all those kind of things, real government style analytics stuff or, some really hardcore stuff, then that's where a larger, bolder font would come into play. The last example is Wrinkly, and Wrinkly is an interesting shift. So Wrinkly uses an interesting way of tracking, which is like letter spacing, to kind of illustrate this sense of luxury and of prestige. Like you buy our product, you'll become prestigious, you'll become luxurious. This is a luxury product. This is what we do. And the subtle boldness in the main header, but keeping the rest of the font relatively thin. The use of like a smaller typeface that basically stays, level throughout the entire body text in the bottom. And then the aggressive letter spacing kind of gives you the illustration of this is an expensive, this is an alluring, this is like a want product that will, make me feel, good about myself when I walk down the street. So yeah, this whole presentation was kind of a bridge from HackDesign.org. They're a great site for developers who aren't designers and want to learn more about design. So I abridged their whole typography talk, and there's a lot more on that site. And I really suggest that you check it out. They send like weekly emails on all this kind of stuff. So I've been going through them and learning a lot through them and stuff like that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Any questions?
Not here.
That was pretty cool. One question. Is tracking and kerning the same thing?
Is what?
Tracking and kerning?
Tracking and kerning. I haven't heard of kerning. I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up. But
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, guys, thank you for coming. Hopefully you learned something today about why font is important. And, just because you put Helvetica New on your site, you could probably do a lot better. So that was like the goal here. And so thanks.
Thanks, Tenji.
Yeah, man.
Thank you. It was really cool.
Thanks, Tenji. Later.
Later.